So good morning, everybody. This is Linda Kopecki with the Minnesota Breastfeeding Coalition. You're at the September workshop, Mental Health and Infant Feeding Through a Cultural Lens. We're very excited about this event today. I'll just jump right into it. I'm going to start with the land acknowledgement that we know that each of us here is inhabiting land that has been the traditional home of Native Americans. This is unceded land, home to over 10,000 lakes and an amazing mighty river called Father of Waters, or the River of the Falls. This land has been home to many Native communities and is now home to 7 Ojibwe reservations and 4 Dakota tribal communities. So Native families have long known breast milk is a baby's first medicine, and yet we also know that colonialism and historical violence and families being separated has really brought the tradition of breastfeeding, mostly for Native families and Native communities. So we at NBC are dedicated to partnering with Indigenous communities and Indigenous families, want to reclaim and restore human milk as a first food and the first medicine for all babies. So welcome to our workshop. Please add your name and your greetings to the chat section. This will be how we get to know each other. We have well over 100 people on this workshop today, which is wonderful. It also speaks to the importance of this topic. And here is the agenda. We're going to have 2 presentations today, Maria Moa and then Joy McAfee on behalf of Postpartum Support Minnesota. And we'll also have some story sharing. We have 3 very mothers who shared their stories about postpartum depression. 2 of them are anonymous. And when speaking with Maria about all 3 stories, she reminded me that, you know, two of these women are Hmong and one is a Native American, but these could be any person's story. These are very typical and very real. So we're going to start with one of the stories and then we'll move into Maria's presentation.
I developed postpartum depression shortly after I gave birth to my first daughter. I believe it was toward at the end of my first month postpartum. I remember I was still on the chicken diet. I felt tired easily. There were days when I got irritated quickly because my husband's brothers and their friends came to party at our house a lot. When the house was loud because people were partying, it was hard for my baby to fall asleep, so she cried. When she cried, I breastfed her again because I thought that she would stop crying if I fed her more, but she puked instead because she wasn't hungry. At that time, I didn't know anything about baby hunger cues. I thought that crying was a sign of hunger, so I kept offering my breast when she cried, and she kept throwing up. When she cried, I cried with her. I felt stressed and sad. At that time, I was a senior in college, and I also had a lot of homework and exams. I tried to talk to my husband to limit his brother's parties at our house, but the conversation never turned out good. He kept telling me that taking care of the children is the wife's responsibility, so I shouldn't complain. He told me that he doesn't like babies because all they can do is eat, poop, and cry. I was the only one who took care of our baby. I felt like it was a lot for me to take care of our baby, clean the house, cook for the family, do homework, and study for my exams at the same time. My husband and I argue a lot. I cried, I was sad, I was stressed, I was angry, I was impatient, I was hopeless. Because my husband did not help me, I created a bonding relationship with my daughter through breastfeeding. Because I kept offering my breast to her when she cried, I was able to maintain a good amount of milk supply. Even though I went through so much, I did have successful breastfeeding. I feel like the skin to skin, the baby smell, and emptying my milk supply often helped my milk production a lot. I decided to introduce formula to my baby because my in-laws said that we are short, so we should give formula to our children to make them tall like American people. For my second baby, she was a premature baby, so she had to stay in the NICU for almost 4 months. My milk supply started to drop after the doctor told me that my baby would need 4 extensive surgeries. She required 2 intestine surgeries, 1 heart surgery, and 1 throat surgery. I started to feel very stressed. I started to blame myself for being a bad mom and not taking good care of my body. That was why I gave birth to her early at 26 weeks. I felt like I was worthless. I started to isolate myself from my sister-in-laws because they had successful pregnancy, but not me. After my daughter got discharged from the hospital, my husband did the same thing. He was too busy spending time with his brothers, and he didn't help me. He did not help me take care of our premature baby. It was a lot harder to take care of a premature baby. This time I was sad, but I was not angry or irritated by what he was doing. However, I did have suicidal thoughts many times. Whenever I was about to commit suicide, I always look at my 2 beautiful daughters and thought to myself, who will take care of them when I die? They need me. I don't want to leave them in this world with my husband because my husband will not feed them food. Even though I went through so much, I did not discuss my marriage complications or my sadness with anyone. Growing up, my parents always taught my sibling and me that the wife needs to respect the husband, because if we don't respect our husband, the community will not respect us, because respect comes from our husband's reputation. Now that our children are growing up and my husband and I are getting older and more mature, my marriage gets better because my husband participates more in their life now. I get to do more meditation. Meditation helps clear my mind, calm me down, and give me positive thoughts, so I can start my day with a clear mind and be able to make better decisions. I don't have suicidal thoughts anymore. I am now a happy woman with more positive thoughts. I love my children and my husband, and right now I feel pretty content with my marriage. If I have postpartum depression again, I'm not sure if I want to seek help because I don't feel comfortable discussing my marriage with people. I want to say thank you to the Minnesota Breastfeeding Coalition for reaching out for my story. I decided to share my story today because the Minnesota Breastfeeding Coalition said I don't have to show my face. I can do in audio to protect my identity and my privacy. Thank you. I developed
I want to say thank you for that story, and acknowledge that we have 3 people sharing their stories today, their personal stories via videos. 2 are anonymous, and please, respect the anonymity and the privacy of all 3 very brave women. And also this is Linda Kopecky again with Minnesota Breastfeeding Coalition. We're moving into our first presentation, but I want to remind all of you that this is a difficult topic today: mental health, postpartum depression, and any part of this discussion may trigger very strong emotions in any one of you. So please take care of your needs. There will be a recording of this. If you need to leave the meeting, if you need to mute, if you need to take care of your needs, please do so. Your first priority. We'll be moving into Maria Mua, who's our first presenter. I'm going to let Maria share her slides and she'll be introducing herself. And we're very excited to have her with us to share her knowledge and her skills. Thank you, Maria.
Thank you, Linda. And welcome, everybody. Good morning.
Are you able to share your slides?
Oh, I'm so sorry.
That's all right.
Yes, let's do that. Let me
Okay.
get there first. Here we go. All right. Okay.
And then you just need to put it in. Perfect. Okay. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Linda. Well, once again, good morning, everyone. And again, my name is Maria Moa. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. And I'm also a certified perinatal and postpartum counselor. I've been working in the mental health counseling field for over 12 years. Just a little background into my professional background. I worked in undergrad, after undergrad, I worked in Ramsey County Children's Mental Health Crisis, and we worked in teams of 2. I wasn't licensed yet at that time, and so I was an unlicensed practitioner working side by side with a licensed professional. And we went to several people's homes throughout the community. And when I was thinking about entering grad school, I was recognizing that there was a need, a greater need for mental health therapists for the Hmong community. And I really was intrigued in the marriage and family therapy model, specifically because I've noticed that for the Hmong community, the best way that we can promote change and mental health is through the family system. And so that's how I became a marriage and family therapist. And I've been very active and passionate about helping our Hmong community throughout my entire life and helping them understand mental health. And because of that, I also became the founder and coordinator for the Hmong Marriage and Family Therapy Support Group. And we are a support group for Hmong mental health students, practitioners, and professionals, or anyone who's interested in getting into the marriage and family therapy field, just mainly because we know that there is a limited number of us out there, and there's a great need in the Hmong community. And so we're here to help support and network with each other, specifically helping us communicate what is it like to be a Hmong therapist, and or what is it like to serve the Hmong community, and what are the unique aspects about the Hmong community that isn't necessarily always taught or shared or communicated about. And so I became a mother, and I'm a mother of 2 wonderful little boys, ages 1 and my oldest is 4 right now, turning almost 5. And I'm also a breastfeeding mom. And so when I became a mother, that's when I also became really passionate about perinatal and postpartum issues for the Hmong community. And so that's when I decided to become certified as well. I am only one of 2 in Minnesota right now, one of 2 officially certified on the postpartum international Minnesota chapter website. I'm the only one of 2 Hmong certified perinatal postpartum counselors right now. So it's definitely an honor and pleasure to be here. And as you can see on our title page, that today we are talking about Hmong breastfeeding mothers and their mental health and treatment strategies. And so just to give a brief history about the Hmong, we are going to talk about that first. And then after that, we will talk about the Hmong culture and mental health, specifically towards Hmong breastfeeding moms. And then finally, we will get into treatment strategies for specifically Hmong breastfeeding moms. Feel free in the chat section to write down questions intermittently throughout today's presentation. I will take a moment to pause and we'll ask if anyone has any questions so that we can try to make this as interactive as possible. And here are the learning objectives. The first learning objectives is to understand what are the unique aspects about being Hmong living in the United States, and how it affects whether or not a Hmong client will seek out for mental health services and other perinatal and postpartum issues. The second learning objective is to understand where survival mentality and narcissistic families systems come from, and how it plays a significant role in being a current major barrier for the Hmong. And then the third learning objective is to understand how to build a trusting relationship with the Hmong, breastfeeding moms and clientele. And then finally, the fourth learning objective is to understand how to detect mental health issues with a Hmong breastfeeding mother and how to empower them to seek out for help and support. And then to give a brief history of the Hmong, almost every, I would say all Asian communities can say that their origins are founded in Confucianism. This was founded by a person named Master Kong back in around 551 BCE. And what Confucianism basically is, generally speaking, it is a philosophy in life based on moral virtues and family system roles. Now, what makes the Hmong community unique? Well, our language is tonal with 8 tones. We have 18 last names, also known as clans. Primarily, we also have 2 main dialects known as white dialect or green dialect, formerly known as the blue Hmong. There are also other dialects around the world, such as the black Hmong, the red Hmong, the flower Hmong, and the stripe Hmong. And our religion is traditionally animist, with the shaman as the spiritual priest or leader. And then the Hmong food and cuisine is remotely unique, with some hybrid based on living in Southeast Asian countries. So depending on what country they are living and coming from, there's some hybrid mixed with the Hmong cuisine. We do also have a persecution history. So the Hmong people origin dates back to China as far back as 4000 BCE. Now, there has been a history of China attempting to solidify all of the people in their country into one nation, which led to major uprisings, such as the Miao Rebellion and the Taiping Rebellion. These conflicts resulted in a mass exodus of the Hmong into mountainous regions of Southeast Asia, areas known today as Laos, Myanmar or Burma, Thailand, and Vietnam. Fast forward to 1961, the White House recruited the Hmong to help fight against objectives in Laos against communism that was on the rise at the time, which led to CIA agent Bill Lair meeting with a young military officer named Vang Ba to discuss supporting the US objectives in Laos. This led to a sharp increase in the number of Hmong troops supported by the American military and CIA, along with huge drops of military supplies. And this signaled the start of what is now called the Secret War. Starting in 1975, this is around after the Vietnam War and the overthrowing of the Laotian monarchy, the Pathet Lao, which is Communist Lao, launched an aggressive campaign to capture or kill Hmong soldiers and families who sided with the CIA. Thousands of Hmong were evacuated or escaped to, on their own to Thailand. Thousands more who have already gone to live deep in the jungle were left to fend for themselves, which led to the creation of the Chow Pha and the Oham freedom fighters movements. Many men also took up arms again to protect their families as they crossed the heavily patrolled Mekong River to safety in Thailand. The Hmong began moving into refugee camps overseen by non-governmental organizations such as the United Nations High Commission of Refugees, the International Organization of Migration, the International Rescue Committee, Refugees International, and the Thai Ministry of the Interior. And the first Hmong family to resettle in Minnesota arrived in November 1975. The largest wave came after the passage of the Refugee Act in 1980. I can confidently say to you that every single Hmong person that lives in the United States today has at least one family member that they are aware of that was that did participate in the secret war. Fast forward to 2004, the Buddhist monastery at Wat Tam Kabrak, the last temporary shelter for 15,000 Hmong remaining in Thailand, finally closed. This final wave came as many as 5,000 settling established in Minnesota Hmong communities. And at the time when they came around 2010, the census recorded was that over 260,000 Hmong lived in the United States, and that 66,000 lived in Minnesota, which was at that time the largest urban population of the Hmong in America. And then according to the 2020 census, the Hmong population in Minnesota currently is 71,700, which is the second largest state next to California, which currently has about approximately 96,000 Hmong residents. So what is the impact of the Hmong persecution history on Hmong mental health and relational dynamics? Well, obviously, every Hmong person that immigrated here, any immigrant that has come to a different country has experienced some type of trauma. And trauma can develop into a mental health diagnosis, officially called post-traumatic stress disorder. To quickly define what post-traumatic stress disorder is, it is a psychiatric disorder involving extreme distress and disruption of daily living that happens in relation to exposure of a traumatic event. It also leads to people who've gone through a perpetual trauma. It causes that person to constantly wonder, well, when is the next bomb going to explode? Which leads to survival mentality. Before I get into that a little bit further, we do have a poll that I would like to ask for everyone to complete, and Linda's going to be putting that up right now. And this poll is to help us know a little bit further about what is your confidence and knowledge of post-traumatic stress disorder and the narcissistic family system. And then what also I would like to know is a following question after the poll is submitted of how confident do you feel in recognizing PTSD and narcissistic family systems in the Hmong community. So once that poll is complete, we can move forward in furthering this discussion.
So we have about 80 people responding to the poll. I'll end it now just because I think these are the results.
Okay.
Very few are very confident.
Okay.
Okay, let me start the second poll.
Thank you very much. That helps a lot for me to understand it. Looking at that first poll, it looks like most of you, a large majority of you, do not feel very confident recognizing PTSD and narcissism. So that helps me to know how much information I should share today. And then once we get through the second poll, that can also help me understand. There we go.
And again, about 80 people responded, and this is the trend.
Right.
Confident.
Look at that, 71% not confident at all.
Okay.
That's a big deal. Okay, so that means I'm going to really get into this. It really helps me to know how much to share and understand about this. So once again, we were talking about post-traumatic stress disorder. You know, my encouragement for you is, I don't know how much time we'll get into really explain what post-traumatic stress disorder is, but definitely we'll definitely get into talking about the results of post-traumatic stress disorder. Let me offer kind of a metaphor. Imagine yourself living in your own home country, going through war, kind of like a veteran in the Vietnam War, right? A lot of times people have family members that have been a veteran in the Vietnam War, but instead of going to a different country and then coming back and saying, you know, the war never left in my mind, instead imagine that it actually happened in your home country in front of your family, and you're trying to protect it and save your family. And then you have to leave your home country and just abruptly go to a different country. And that's the Hmong narrative. That's the Hmong experience. And so just like how we have a lot of Vietnam War veterans who went from the United States to Vietnam and came back and said that the war never left their head. Well, we have a lot of soldiers in the Hmong community where instead of leaving our country, it happened on our home turf, and then we came to the United States, and again, the war never left our head, and our family has experienced that with us. So hopefully that helps provide an imagery of what the Hmong experience has been with trauma. As you can tell from the Hmong history, we have been through perpetual trauma. And so again, that leaves that constant wonder of like, when is the next bomb going to explode, leading to survival mentality. So this is what survival mentality is. Well, first of all, it is not survivor mentality, past tense, which implies that I've been through trauma and now I'm recovering and overcoming. For these purposes, we are going to talk about survival mentality, present tense, as the definition of more of the idea of I'm constantly going through perpetual situations of chaos, whether real or imaginary, which forces me to focus primarily on the essentials for survival, such as food, resources, and finances. This type of mindset leads to a chaotic type of lifestyle and less on a peaceful type of mind frame for living. So hopefully that makes sense for everyone. And then narcissistic family systems. For the Hmong people, having a lack of country, a lack of government, and a lack of education leads to a lack of accountability on the people group, and the passing down of our cultural heritage and social rules. In the Hmong family system, we rely heavily on the elder to hold the rules of the culture and the heritage. Since there is no higher up to hold the elder accountable, no one is able to question the elder from abusing the system. This leads to narcissistic family systems. Therefore, intergenerational dysfunctional family systems arises and is normalized as part of the Hmong culture and identity. And questioning it is met with a lot of rigidity, resistance, judgment, and backlash. And I can tell you right now, even the information that I'm hearing is very hard for generally the Hmong people to swallow. And I know that if you disagree with me, if you are part of the Hmong community, if you feel like you have a different opinion, that's okay. I'm okay with that. I'm just sharing what has been my professional experience and outlook in working with the Hmong community. Okay. So how does this impact the mental health of breastfeeding Hmong moms? Here are the outcomes for for a breastfeeding Hmong woman or wife or mother living in a survival mentality and an intergenerational narcissistic family system. For a Hmong woman, being the ideal or perfect mother, daughter-in-law, wife, and daughter is the quintessential equivalent of seeking the Holy Grail in the Hmong society. All in that order, by the way. It defines the self-worth in a Hmong female. The reason why that is because the Hmong existence is family-based. Identity is based on clan, dialect, last name, reputation, etc. Hmong females are raised to be mothers. Mothers hold the primary responsibility in raising the children, which is the essence of the next generation to the family. If the children are not raised well, then unfortunately, the main blame does fall upon the mother. Also, if Hmong children are quote unquote genetically flawed, then again, the main blame falls upon the mother. In addition, if only girls are born and hardly any males, again, the main blame falls upon the mother. And therefore, the husband is often encouraged to find a new wife. It's sad, but it's actually true. Spiritual curses and destinies also hold a heavy load on a woman mother's shame and sense of self-value. For example, if something is wrong with you, the Hmong often believe that it has 100% to do with a spiritual issue, which means that this is something that you need to repent and pay an animal sacrifice for. Or it could also be that it's something that you are cursed with and are doomed for the rest of your life. This implies that as a Hmong person, you have to be complicit with whatever life throws at you, which also means you do not have the power to make any positive changes in your life because you are cursed and it's probably your fault. Therefore, when a professional tries to encourage a breastfeeding Hmong mom to improve her life and or to seek out self-help and resources, sometimes the professional may experience an apathetic response due to there being possibly a spiritual component that the Hmong mom may or may not communicate about. Now, I'm just going to take a moment to pause right there and see if there's any questions before we go on to talk about suicide. If there's not, that's okay, and we'll keep going.
So the only question that I see, this is Linda, is if your PowerPoint will be available. And yes, we'll be sending the recording and the PDFs of both PowerPoints to everybody who's registered after this. So you can reference the PowerPoint and you can reference the recording. Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, so let's move on to suicide then. Now, suicide in the Hmong community is often romanticized and therefore seen as a virtue of selfless love. In other words, it is seen as an out when you are spiritually cursed or doomed in your current state. So for example, there's a film in the scene there's a film scene from a film called The Joy Luck Club. And in this scene, there is a Chinese mom. She's actually the fourth wife within a polygamy marriage. And she committed suicide on a specific significant day. And it was a way to self-sacrifice herself for her children's sake in order to force her husband and his wife in power, who was the second wife, to repent and to treat the children with respect. So here's the Asian lesson here. Killing yourself is seen as the ultimate sacrifice. The message is your children will be better off without you, and your sacrifice will empower your child to live a better life. So think about the film Harry Potter. That's a more modern, popular film, if you're familiar with it. And so in the Harry Potter film, his mother made the ultimate sacrifice. But in this case, the Hmong mom is actually taking her own life. Even in Japan today, it is still common for a person to commit suicide rather than facing shame for having to fail a large project at work, or for a student to fail entering an ideal college, because there is this deep heritage of viewing suicide as an honorable resolution to saving face for your family. Now, it doesn't mean that all Hmong moms believe that suicide is a healthy response. As you heard in the video that we played before my presentation today, that this younger mom, she understood as much as she contemplated suicide, she knew that that wasn't a healthy answer. There are many younger generational Hmong mothers who understand that contemplating suicide is not a healthy mental state. However, as much as they understand that suicide isn't healthy, they may still romanticize and express suicide as part of their normalized way of talking, as it's been ingrained throughout the generations as an honorable exit strategy. So in other words, it's hard to wash something out of your head that's been hammered in subconsciously and continuously throughout your entire life and for generations. Therefore, as a provider for breastfeeding Hmong mothers, I just want to let you know that it doesn't help to overreact and to send a Hmong mother patient to the hospital right away if they do express thoughts of suicide and or self-harm. On the other hand, it is also helpful to let them know what the safety protocols are if they do mention suicide. You can also tell them that killing themselves is not the answer to giving their children a better life. And sometimes they'll ask why, and you can say, well, because the outcomes show that children do better when their moms are living with them, even if that includes having hardship in their life. Okay, moving on, we're going to talk about this next topic here. Still another mental health barrier. Though it's often not easy to speak about, most traditional Hmong families normalize domestic abuse. This is inclusive to verbal abuse, emotional abuse, physical abuse, and even sexual abuse. Now, if a Hmong wife wants to divorce her husband and leave an abusive situation, she has to ask for permission from both families first. Here's the risk that she's taking. In the Hmong community, a divorced Hmong woman are often seen as outcasts and quote unquote worthless or used trash. Now, unfortunately, Hmong parents tend to be more ashamed of taking back their daughter into their family than to have a single daughter in the first place, knowing that she is divorced. They believe that no Hmong man would ever want to marry her again, and therefore at this point, she might as well marry a non-Hmong man or take on the offer of an older Hmong man who will graciously take her on as a third or fourth wife. And then just so that you all know, the Hmong community traditionally practices polygamy. Not so much the younger generation now, but I would say that it's still practiced. Even people of my age, the men are encouraged to find more than one wife. Now, the reason why I say not the second wife, because ideally in the Asian community, I think the general idea is that the first wife for the man or husband is the wife that you should marry. It's the woman that your parents wanted you to marry. And so then therefore the second wife is often the woman that you really wanted to marry. And then the third and fourth wife are the ones that you are graciously taking on out of charity and to gloat how wealthy you are because you are able to afford the dowry. Now remember, divorce is seen as culturally shameful. Therefore, her shame brings on the shame to her family. It signifies that this family clan is not able to breed good wives, and therefore other Hmong clans should stay away from them. I'm going to take a pause real quick before I move on and see if there's any questions. Okay. All right.
So there is one question. So if a woman has a plans for suicide, would your advice change if she has a plan?
Absolutely. Thank you for asking that question. So if she is saying, I am suicidal, I have a plan, here are some basic questions that you can ask her to know how to move forward. So one of the questions that you can ask her is, on a scale of 0 to 10, 10 meaning I'm going to kill myself indefinitely. I'm going to do it sometime today, sometime in the near future. I have a date set down. And then 0 means absolutely not. This is a fleeting thought. This is more of a psychological disparity, but I know that I'm not going to do it. So you can ask her on that scale. And of course, the higher that she's closer to a 10, the more realistic that you know that she is putting her life in danger. When you ask her for the plan, you can ask her, does she have access and a means? Because sometimes a person might say, I have an idea of what I could do, right? Which is a little bit different from a plan. But if they say, yeah, I have access and means, I'm planning to take pills and I'm going to overdose. The pills are right here. And I'm not going to do anything to prevent it. That can make things a lot more scary. So most certainly if the red flags are all checking and they're answering yes to all of those things, that's the time where I would encourage you to recommend for them to get help, for them to go to the hospital right away and to get evaluated for mental health. Okay, hopefully that helps answer the question. Is there any follow-up questions to that?
Yes, there was a question related to, is divorce still viewed this way in the younger generations, and are suicide rates higher in Minnesota for Hmong communities?
So that's a two-part question. So I'll answer the first part. So the first part was, is divorce seen as culturally shameful still? It is, because individually, I would say the younger generation understand that divorce is not a shameful thing, but what they're more afraid of is the backlash and the isolation, the rejection that they will receive from the Hmong community. So the answer is yes. So I would say that when I speak with my Hmong patients and they are contemplating divorce and they say, I'm in a unhealthy marriage and there's no reason for me to stay except for the shame that I'm going to cause my family and the rejection, the isolation that I'm going to receive from them. I'm not going to get support from anyone. My family will be ashamed of me. They are going to want me to stay with him. And they're not going to support me in leaving. And when I do leave, no one's going to want to socially relate with me anymore in the Hmong community. So that's the concern there. What was the second question?
It was, let's see, it was related to suicide rates in the Hmong community.
No, that I don't have an answer for that. So I do apologize. I'm not sure what the statistic is for that. Okay, how about we take one more question?
There is a question. This is Linda. There is a question about antidepressant medications. Okay. Just perceptions of antidepressant medications.
That's a good question. So I would say that typically for the Hmong people, they generally are not welcoming. You'll see this in the later slides of the presentation. The Hmong community is not usually welcoming of Western medicine. And so they will try their best to seek alternatives first. Well, first of all, even to backstep before that, the Hmong people don't believe in mental health. They see mental health as a barrier and a taboo. Not a barrier, they see it as a non-existent and a taboo. So to say that you have divorce and then to seek out antidepressants is not culturally accepting. But let's just say, even if you do have a Hmong patient who is willing and able to say, yeah, I do have depression. And then you say, well, are you open to seeking antidepressants? No, I'm not. And so there's there is definitely a lot of hesitancy there of saying, you know, I don't want American medicine. If, you know, for one instance, my parents are pushing me to seek out herbal remedies. That's a big piece. So a lot of times you'll see, even if a Hmong person is seeking out antidepressants, they might also be taking herbal remedies, whether they tell you or not. So it's always good to know if they're doing that as well. But also they're also afraid of what's the side effects. I hear that often from my patients, of being fearful of being reliant on a drug or having side effects. And so that's why they often are hesitant. They would try to overcome their depression in holistic ways before seeking out an antidepressant. Okay, so hopefully that helps answer your question. So let's talk about what happens in with regards to divorce. If a woman is trying to escape a relationship that is abusive and she's come to this conclusion, here's what's supposed to happen. So someone is supposed to take ownership in taking care of this woman. That's just how this culture is, especially if the divorce is due to something that's not her fault, which is very rare, by the way. And when I say that, I'm not saying objectively that it's, you know, not her fault. I'm saying subjectively, that subjectively in the Hmong culture, it is usually put as her fault, that she's not good enough, that she's not working hard enough to keep his attention. The reason why he's running off and sleeping with other girls is because you're not being a good enough wife. You're not being a good enough daughter-in-law. You're not good enough mother. And again, in the Hmong community, they support and value polygamy. So let him go sleep with other women. That's okay. That's normative in the Hmong community and culture. Okay. But going back to this, someone is supposed to take ownership of this woman. Let's say she does get to a point where she's like, you know, I really don't want to be married to him anymore. Someone's supposed to take ownership of her as a way to protect her image and the family image. Now, unfortunately, in a flawed Hmong system, that's not always the case. Many Hmong parents are often negligent in their part in representing and taking back responsibility over their daughter. So let me give you an example here. I had a Hmong female patient come in to therapy, and she was in an abusive relationship, struggled with a lot of postpartum, and was feeling suffocated, essentially. And her family of origin forced her to return to her abusive husband out of threat of being disowned and isolated from her family of origin. So then in our workings together, I had to teach her how to hire a quote unquote Hmong lawyer. In the Hmong community, we don't necessarily have actual professional lawyers that are culturally in tune with our culture, but I was pretty much using that terminology to say you can hire or request for someone to be representative of you, because your parents are supposed to be your representative, but unfortunately, oftentimes they're not. They're actually on his side. They're actually going to push you to go back to him. And so because no one is representing you, and in the Confucian culture, someone's supposed to represent you, I encourage her to hire you know, for lack of a better term, a Hmong lawyer to represent her, and to speak on her behalf, to help advocate for her so that she wouldn't feel alone, she wouldn't feel isolated, and she wouldn't feel ganged up on. So finally, this brings up to my next point about how to help breastfeeding Hmong moms, is that finally Hmong women, if they need the permission of her parents and husband to do, finally Hmong women need the permission of her parents and her husband before making any major significant changes in her life. And this includes the change of unhealthy mind frames. Thus, if she has given the key and the power to her parents, her spouse, in driving the decisions in her life, and her internal mind frame, her self-perception, whether or not she has the ability versus the lack of ability or self-confidence. And I deal with this all the time. Let me give you another case study here. I had another Hmong breastfeeding mother who couldn't say no to anything. She didn't feel like she had the ability, and she was overworked, overrun, and constantly reinforced by her husband and her mother and mother-in-law to take on more than she was able to. What I told her in our therapeutic settings was that she needed permission, because she held the key, but she didn't know how to take back the key. So then I said to her, well, then she needed the permission of her male elder to help slow things down and to hold her husband and both her mother and mother-in-law accountable. And ultimately, the eldest father holds the main key in the Hmong cultural settings. They're the final decision maker. And whether the Hmong people recognize it or not, openly, we do recognize it internally that the eldest father is Confucianism. So that brings me to the next section here, treatment strategies. But before we get into treatment strategies, I have a final poll here that I would like to ask everyone to complete. And this is going to help me know kind of how do we focus the remainder of our time. So as you notice, the question here is, are you interested in learning about why new Hmong mothers would be interested in seeing a non-Hmong provider? I think the reason why that's important is the following. Because I think before you can treat your Hmong patients, I think it's good to know why they would like to see you or not. I think it's very telling, and it's actually going to help you know how to treat them better. But you know, I think also that we may not have time. Oh, here's the response anyhow. Okay, I was gonna say we may not have time to actually get through all of the slides today, just because there's a lot of information happening right now. So if we don't finish with the slides, I would say that the treatment strategies at the end of this presentation, many of those slides are straightforward. And so they are easy to read, and I think that most of you will be able to get the point. So let's get into this then. So I think, again, before we get into treatment strategies, I think it might be a good thing to know first and understand, number one, either why a Hmong patient would rather see a non-Hmong provider over a Hmong provider, or why a Hmong patient would rather see a Hmong provider over a non-Hmong provider. So here are the reasons why it's good to know this first. Number one is because you may want to know what scars, prejudices, and or hesitancies they are carrying through that door. When you are aware, you may have the ability to help win them over, to help show them that you do have something to offer, or at the very least, you may gain the confidence to be willing to let them go as a patient and to refer them out, knowing that their rejection for your help may have nothing to do with you and your professional approach. Rather, it's more based on their own schemas. Now, this is to not give you permission to refer them out too quickly, though. Remember, even if you are not ethnically, racially, the type of provider that they would prefer, you could still win them over based on your knowledge of their schemas, in which case you can present to them with great compassion and understanding, ultimately helping them to overcome their own internal and external prejudices and preconceived notions. So here we go. So the first one is why sometimes Hmong patients do not seek non-Hmong providers. Let's talk about that first. In other words, here are the main complaints that I've heard from Hmong patients about when they see a non-Hmong professional. So in my professional experience, at least 60% of the time, if not more, the Hmong patient feels like they have to educate the non-Hmong professional about the nuances of the Hmong culture. Thus, they feel like most of their time and money is going towards educating someone about their culture. Hmong patients, just like any other people, don't want to spend the majority of their time explaining to others about what their culture is like, especially when they're in the midst of struggling with their own culture. Hmong people generally do not like outsiders, and in actuality, they often disdain help from outsiders. They have tribal mentality, which stems from survival mentality. They also struggle with an inferiority complex that is masked with a pseudo superior complex. And this is a unique trait of narcissism. Thus, Hmong people as a culture are traditionally racist and prejudiced, even against their own kind. So we'll get to that in a second here too. Historically, Hmong people are seen as less than by the purest Chinese. Hmong are often seen as these crossbreeds that are also barbaric. So for example, the Hmongling, which is how the Green Hmong like to identify themselves, is translated into Hmong Jaw by the White Hmong. Now, Hmongling art patterns on their shirt is worn backwards to distinct themselves from the Blue Hmong, who had a specific clan that were cannibals. So essentially, the Green Hmong wear a shirt that has a blue pattern. And so they were originally known as the Blue Hmong. But now the Green Hmong actually put that pattern backwards. It's inside out. And so even though they have that same pattern, it's backwards. And the reason why that is because there is a story about how there was a blue clan that were cannibals, and because the Hmong people in that clan no longer wanted to be associated from them, they changed their clothing, how they wear their clothing, and they identify as Hmongling instead of Blue Hmong, and Hmongling is seen as Green Hmong by the White Hmong. Thus, the Hmong is generally seen as a race that is poor, uneducated, and barbaric, once led by the guerrilla warlord General Vang Pao. Breaking free from the stigmatism has been difficult for the Lao to accept, who has also taken on this negative viewpoint of the Hmong, giving reason to promote genocide of the Hmong people in Laos that still continues today. Hmong people try their best to protect their cultural image while also holding shame of how other larger Asian groups, namely the Lao, Thai, and Chinese, etc., view them, thus carrying a pseudo superiority complex in order to mask their inferiority complex. So hopefully that makes sense for everyone. This is why the Hmong people might act guarded, if not high-nosed, against the Americans, which is often associated to the dominant white Caucasian culture as a way to protect themselves from continuing to feel more inferior. Often saying something like white people just don't understand their culture and therefore can't help them, while also acknowledging that the American standard of practice is more modern and ultimately better in the Hmong ways. Notice the contradiction here. So I'm going to refer back to the original story that the Hmong woman, the anonymous Hmong woman, shared on audio that we first heard together. And she was talking about how she was overproducing milk for her baby. But then she was pushed by her in-laws, I believe, her parents or her in-laws, to instead feed her baby with formula, because they had this idea in their mind that Americans are taller, we're short and small people. We want to be big like them, so we can't breastfeed our baby. We have to give them formula. Formula is a superior way of feeding their children. But here's the funny thing. I can guarantee you that if a breastfeeding provider came to her home and said, I just want to let you know, and spoke to her parents, say, I just want to let you know that formula is not superior to breast milk. Breast milk is superior. The Hmong parents would not listen. They would not believe in the non-Hmong provider or the Hmong, maybe they're even a Hmong provider, but they would not believe in that scientific based education. And the reason why the Hmong parents would not believe that is because they distrust Americans. Oftentimes what I hear Hmong elder parents say is that don't believe what those Americans tell you because they're trying to trick you. They don't want us to become better. They want us to stay down underneath their feet. So we assume that their technology is better, but we know better than them. We don't want their help, but we're still going to rely on them. And so again, notice the contradiction here. So where does this lead us? Unfortunately, Hmong people feel trapped within this Hmong matrix. And this is all because it is out of fear of becoming extinct, okay? So remember, right now, the Hmong people have been twice removed from our home country. We originated in China. We were forced down by the Chinese to live in Southeast Asian countries. And then since the Vietnam War, because we helped the Americans, we fought against communism. We had to flee our second country out of fear of mass genocide. And now we're living in a third country. And we have this ultimate fear of becoming extinct. We live in a survival present tense mentality. And therefore, Hmong people are highly unlikely to accept modern medicine, again, which is associated with American and or white culture, unless oftentimes they are forced under penalty of law or threat of death. I see that oftentimes with Hmong families where they are told you are going to die unless you get this bone marrow transplant. And then they are forced, your child's going to kill themselves or you're going to die unless you get help, okay? So why would some Hmong patients not want to see other Hmong providers? Good question. Here's why. So again, this is now going on to why sometimes Hmong patients do not want to see Hmong providers. In other words, here are the main complaints that I hear from Hmong patients about other Hmong professionals. Number one, there is this fear of the Hmong professional being biased towards the traditional ways. A lot of Hmong patients understand that in a lot of ways, the tradition of the Hmong culture that is practiced today has betrayed them in a lot of ways and does not do them good for their mental health and relational health. Thus, the Hmong professional doesn't end up being an unbiased professional. They end up being another elder or parent figure there to lecture and shame them. and to therefore enable the continual dysfunction in the Hmong cultural family system. There is also this fear of information being shared in the community, which is a lack of protection in one's privacy rights. Hmong people, once again, remember that Hmong people's reputation and sense of self-worth and identity is primarily based on the mercy of the judgment of the Hmong community. Therefore, if they work with a Hmong provider, they are often fearful of their private health information being easily leaked into the Hmong community. Even to this day, I think 99% of the time when I'm seeing a Hmong patient for the first time, I am often asked by them the same question. Since you are Hmong, how can my information be kept private and away from the rest of the Hmong community? Isn't that interesting? I never ever get that question from anyone else except for Hmong patients. And they always say, I acknowledge that you're a Hmong person. I hope that you are professional enough to protect my private health information, but I'm gonna double check. Are you going to put your ethnicity above your professionality first? Or are you going to be professional first above your ethnicity? So I just wanted to acknowledge that as well. And then lack of professionality. Many times Hmong patients have tried Hmong professionals in the past who are supposed to be professional, but have shown to have a lack of ethics and moral judgment. Unfortunately, this is all too common for Hmong quote unquote professionals, that they would embezzle their own kind. There's a lot of under the table type of exchanges in the Hmong professional community. Therefore, Hmong professionals are often seen as untrustworthy, especially if there isn't an American government to keep them accountable. Remember, the Hmong community does not have a higher government that keeps them accountable, and that's why we have narcissistic family systems. This is also because, and that's what I'm saying there too, yeah. So thus, Hmong patients have likely already been wounded by the Hmong community and don't trust the Hmong anymore. Once again, it's good to know these things because you can be aware of the potential scars and prejudices that the Hmong patient might have. The more aware that you are, the more sensitive you could be. And therefore, you can avoid any potential invisible landmines while working with your Hmong client. You might also be able to win them over and show them that not everybody will abuse them or take advantage of them, which will ultimately help them take one step further into healing from their trauma and other mental health issues. You could also uplift them and empower them to advocate for themselves, to see life with a different perspective. Okay, before we get into treatment strategies for real now, let's take a pause again and see if there's any follow-up questions.
So Maria, one person wanted to unmute and ask her question, and I think that's Krista, feel free to ask your question.
Oh, thank you so much. And thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. I have worked with Hmong people for many years, since the 80s, and have run into many of these beliefs and cultural values. And I'm wondering how that may be changing or already changed. And if you can, I don't know, even maybe quantify for us, you know, what percentage do you think the Hmong community still lives by, particularly young people, by these beliefs? You know, would you say something like 70% or 90% or I don't know. Do you have a way of quantifying that for us or helping us understand how things may be changing?
Thank you, Krista, for that question. My initial response is that's a very complex question with a very complex answer. And the reason why I say that is I'm going to respond in a very Asian way. So from an Asian understanding, the Hmong culture is part of a large tree. So metaphorically speaking, we are part of a large mother tree. And the roots of the mother tree is in Confucianism. And we are a branch of many, many large branches in the Asian community. And as a part of that tree, we take a lot of pride in being Asian. We recognize that the Asian ethnicity is the largest ethnicity in the world, with China being the largest ethnicity of all the Asians' ethnicity. We take a lot of pride in being a part of that. So to say that that a lot of the information that I'm sharing now is not necessarily being tossed aside, for lack of term, but is being overcome by the younger generation is kind of a yes and no answer. And let me explain that a little bit further. So right now we are living in generation 2 and 3. So generation 1 is the generation that was not born in the United States. And I'm talking about the Hmong immigrants here. The Hmong generation was not born in the United States, but came to the United States around the mid to late 1970s, all the way up to the late 2010. And so they are often known as Generation 1. Generation 1.5 is the generation where they were maybe a baby when they came here. So they primarily grew up in the United States. Generation 2 is the generation that was born in the United States. So they were probably born in the late 1970s, early 1980s. So right now, this is the generation 2, that I'm generation 2, that are the adults that are adulting and having their own children right now. And if they married young, and if they had children since they were 14, 15, that's usually the youngest that I've seen, maybe 18, then they have very, very much older children right now who are generation 3. And right now, the main generation that are adults, again, are generation number 2. And generation number 2 is heavily influenced and impacted by generation 1 and 1.5. So I would say that right now, for the majority of adults, mothers who are breastfeeding, who are seeking postpartum help or receiving postpartum help, are generation 2, maybe generation 3. Okay. And if they are generation 3, they probably are slowly breaking away from the dysfunctions of the Hmong culture, but not completely, because their mother is probably at the oldest age. Their mother is probably in her mid 40s right now, a generation 2 mother. And so she's probably as active in a young 20-year-old, 18-year-old generation 3 mother's life. And so who knows what the next, the next 2 generations are going to look like. We can only really tell based on other Asian immigrants that have come to the United States sooner. So I know that the Chinese and Japanese immigrants came at least 2 decades earlier than us, and they have assimilated in a lot of ways. But see, the difference there, again, is that they have a home country. They have a country that they can say, there's Japan on the map, there's China on the map. The Hmong people don't really have a country on the map. And the country that they recently left to come to the United States is trying to mass genocide them, is trying to kill them. So we really can't return to our home country because it's not a safe place for us to go. So then what happens is the Hmong people live out of fear of being extinct. And so out of that fear of being extinct, we clamp down onto our traditions, our cultural practices, and then we value them. We see them as part of our identity. And so what I'm trying to present today is to really help differentiate between this is how we currently identify ourselves, and this is the dysfunction from it. I would have to say that the work that all of us are doing, and that I'm hoping to educate all of us today, is that if we are able to teach our patients, that our Hmong patients, that the dysfunctional parts of our culture that we identify as our culture is really not healthy and shouldn't be a part of our culture, and that we're not going to lose our identity as Hmong people, as Asian people, because we can actually go back to the mother tree and the roots of the mother tree, which is Confucianism. If we educate ourselves, that's going to be really telling about how well the next generation is going to be responsive into breaking free from this matrix. So it's kind of like we can't tell unless we start educating the younger Hmong generation now to see it in a more healthy perspective. If the younger generation are not educated, this is the problem that's going to happen next. And this is what I'm seeing now. What I'm seeing in the second generation and in the third generation Hmong is that they are leaving the Hmong culture. They're saying Hmong culture is abusive and dysfunctional. They're abandoning us. So I'm going to walk away from the Hmong culture. And I have a lot of younger generation Hmong patients who are very resentful towards the Hmong culture, and they want nothing to do with the Hmong culture. And so now they are basically nomads. They have no people group, no country, no identity. And they come into therapy feeling broken. And they come into therapy hating the Hmong culture in a lot of ways. And they feel despondent without any support. So my hypothesis, but my proposal here is to try to say, hey, I don't want you to look at the Hmong culture and to bash it completely and say it's horrible, because, you know, we have to look at our history and look at it with understanding and compassion and say, you know, the reason why we got to this place is because of our persecution history. You know, we're flawed, we're human beings, and we're living in a survival mentality. But if you can, again, go back to the mother tree and go to the roots of the tree and see that there is something beautiful, something that we came from, we don't have to cut our branch off from the tree. We can still be a part of the tree. But now the younger generation, they have a higher calling. They are called to re-educate our community, to reteach the Hmong people, what does it actually mean to be Hmong? What does it actually mean to be a healthier or more enlightened version of ourselves? And so that's why it's hard for me to give a percentage, because it's almost like our branch is splitting into several other mini branches, and many of those branches are dying off. And so, you know, if you're saying how many are Hmong, well, there's a lot of them that don't even want to identify as Hmong anymore. And I'm trying to encourage them to say, you can still identify as Hmong, but have a more enlightened version of what does it mean to be Hmong and how to have a healthier Hmong perspective. Crystal, does that kind of help answer the question? I do apologize, it is a bit complex.
Yeah, no, that was wonderful, Maria. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for that question. I really appreciate that. Okay. Should we move on then? Yeah, I think so. We don't have too much time here left, about 10 minutes here. Okay, so here are the treatment strategies. So remember that the Hmong culture is based on Confucianism. Those are the roots of our tree. So if all else fails, refer the patient back to Confucianism as the standard to helping a Hmong patient break free from their mental health barriers. So let me give you an example. Asian people in general value poetic language and proverbs. When a patient is struggling with a cultural rule that seems absolute, you can push the envelope by making a statement through a poetic proverb or metaphor. So here's an example. Here is a Hmong proverb. So notice that the meaning of this proverb is the wife is the loom, the husband hangs the thread, the wife listens to her husband's lessons, and the husband listens to the wife's opinions. So this is a really powerful proverb. When I'm talking to a breastfeeding mom who feels like I'm asking for help, I'm telling him, I can't do this on my own. I need him to hear me. And he's minimizing. He's putting me in a box, right? And so this is a beautiful proverb to sit down with the husband and say, look, you know, Confucianism says, even, you know, in our Hmong culture, we have a proverb that says, I'm going to listen to you and you're going to listen to me. Therefore, encourage her to overcome the dysfunctional dynamics in her cultural system by learning to be affluent in Confucianism. In other words, since the Hmong are not being held accountable by their own entity, have the eldest father, Confucianism, hold them accountable. So here's a tip. Whether or not you are a Hmong provider, I would like to encourage you to find another Hmong provider, Hmong mental health professional, colleague to help give consult. There are so many cultural barriers that both a Hmong and non-Hmong professional is not able to see because they are not living or they are entangled within the Hmong matrix. Having a professional Hmong colleague who is willing to be a reference point to consult is going to help you to see what are those invisible barriers could be and why are they so difficult for a Hmong person to overcome. Know that sometimes mental health questionnaires won't be helpful. Hmong mental health patients have a tendency to underscore and or overscore. So here are some reasons why a Hmong patient would underscore. Again, mental health is seen as taboo and therefore is non-existent, which often implies that Hmong people lack the emotional attunement. Therefore, what could be depression or anxiety is displayed through psychosomatic symptoms instead of a Hmong person being able to verbally express their emotions. There's also this fear factor of getting in trouble, either by the Hmong family, having shame, getting child protection services called, being labeled as a bad mother or daughter-in-law or daughter. Oftentimes, the label is worse than asking for help. Here are some reasons why a Hmong patient would overscore. Exaggerated emotional responses are indicative of trauma, which all first and second generation, and maybe even third, rolling into third generation people have. Pent up emotions, anger, which is in a secondary emotional state. We'll get to that chart next. From a lifetime of intergenerational dismissal and shaming of mental health. People who have been traumatized also have a tendency to be overly transparent and to struggle opening up too quickly. They struggle opening up too quickly because their boundaries have been crossed several times maybe, which has caused them to have a vulnerability and confusion about sharing too much, not knowing how much to share with others on an immediate level, which causes them to feel an immediate shame and a sense of uncomfortability for allowing a stranger into their emotional sacred space without building the time and trust needed before an individual could have the privilege to earning the trust of the patient's sacred information. So here's a treatment strategy that I like to use when working with a Hmong mother and helping her to be more in tune to herself and to have a more accurate reading of where she's at. So I like to educate her about what primary and secondary emotions are. What I like to tell her is whenever an event triggers us, it triggers our primary emotions. However, if it feels too overwhelming or unsafe, what presents itself are these secondary emotions. Now, I'm not here to say that primary emotions are better than secondary emotions or vice versa, emotions are neither good nor bad. They're more like an indicator to let you know that something is going on, and it's important to take a moment to recognize. It's kind of like a check engine light in your car. When I'm driving my car and the check engine light turns on, I do not get upset or angry at the check engine light. I take notice of it and say, oh, there's something going on in my car. I need to take a moment to notice and process. And so therefore, whenever a patient is in their secondary emotional state, I often tell them that recognize that it could lead to, so there's a mistype on that one. It says primary emotion leads to the cycle. It's actually probably secondary emotion. It leads to a cycle where you can attack, criticize, demand, or blame, et cetera, et cetera. It could lead to addictive behaviors. In the long run, it does not calm or soothe. It actually pushes others away. It decreases intimacy. Therefore, the goal in therapy is this, that whenever you're in a secondary emotional state, to recognize that you first need to practice healthy coping skills to help you to feel less overwhelmed, to help you feel more safe. That way you can tap into your primary emotions, which is joy, fear, sadness, shame, disappointment, helplessness, hopelessness, despair, inadequacy, worthlessness. Anything essentially that makes you feel vulnerable is a primary emotion. Once you're able to tap into your primary emotions, then you can finally be honest with yourself, seek for connection, ask for what you really need, allow yourself the space to grieve and to be calmed and soothed, and therefore it brings closeness and intimacy. In order to get a more accurate reading on the Hmong mom's mental health, I would just encourage you to make a pie chart and ask her how much time she's spending on everything. And then compare it to how much energy is being used in each area. I think that will be really telling of what she's spending her time on and how much energy she's using. This is also an opportunity to let her know that self-care is important and to discuss the barriers of her not making self-care a priority. And then discuss about the potential consequences that if she does not prioritize self-care. Now remember, your ideal for her self-care may not match what's realistic for her. The point here is, in order to build a trusting professional relationship with her, where she doesn't withdraw from you emotionally, is to allow her the autonomy to make steps in what is possible for her to make self-care a priority. I would also say stay positive and strengths-based. Ask her, where does she get her motivation to get up each day from? Remember that Hmong women often easily deflate their sense of self-worth because it relies so heavily on her husband and parents' opinion. Thus, as a person of authority, you have the power to help inflate her sense of worth by acknowledging her strengths, her efforts, and good intentions. Also know that Hmong people don't traditionally value positive affirmations, and if they do, they don't usually practice it sharing directly with their own family unit. They actually relied on outside extended family to do so and praising them. So naturally, as a human being, she is starving for positive affirmations and emotional validation. By you feeding into her soul, by sharing kind words of affirmation and validation, it will help soothe her, slow her down, and gain some perspective to open up. Now, to really hit a home run, in other words, showing that you do have some insights into the dysfunction of the Hmong culture, ask her, what does her mother, parents, elders say about her? What is she doing right? What is she doing wrong? What does she need to continue to put up with? The Hmong phrase here is "wo xian de." "Wo xian de" literally means to make your heart long. The literal definition is to be patient. The implication here is be patient for an eternity, no matter what. This is typically used, to pressure an abused Hmong wife mom to submit and to comply to the continued abuse that she is going through. It is often expressed by family members, usually elders. So when you do ask her, what does her family say that she needs to continue to "wo xian de" for, it shows that you understand the abuse and or dysfunction that she's being pressured to comply with. Remember, the objective here is to not put pressure on her from your end and to try to get her to break free from the suppression that she's experiencing, but rather to show her that you understand her predicament. You acknowledge her injustice and that you are willing to patiently work with her to help her feel more self-empowered, to understand how to break free from the Hmong mental health matrix, and perhaps even become confident enough to make a positive and lasting systematic change into her own culture. All right, and we have a couple minutes left to see if there's any final questions.
My journey with postpartum depression was very difficult. Unfortunately, I experienced postpartum depression with all 4 of my pregnancies. I would feel lost, irritable, disconnected, sad, and misunderstood all the time. I often feel withdrawal from people. I didn't want to be around anyone, not even with my kids. I cried every night, and I didn't want to get up most days. I remembered I would become extremely obsessed about having control of everything, making sure my house was clean at all times. My kids must have naps at specific times, and if any of these was not done for some reason, I knew that that night I would be up. I would get tired because I didn't sleep, and it became a vicious cycle again the next day. And so this would be my routine, days in and days out. Little did I know I was feeling and doing all of this because I feel like everything was out of my control. I wanted to have some sort of control over my body, my mind, and just my life in general, but it was extremely difficult. When I was pregnant with my 4th child, I knew I didn't want to feel the same way I did with my first 3 postpartum. The last month of my pregnancy, I wanted to be proactive, so I put a plan together to help me combat postpartum depression this time around. My plan included a support group, taking medication, therapy, and times for myself outside of the house. My support group are my sisters, close friends, my midwife, and my partner. As for medication, my midwife and I agreed that I would start taking Zoloft immediately after labor for 2 years. I also scheduled out weekly therapy sessions with a counselor for the 3 months that I would be on maternity leave. Another crucial thing I did was schedule dates for me to be alone away from my house, and during those times I can do whatever I want to do. Because I took proactive steps, even though I did experience postpartum depression with my 4th pregnancy, it was mild and manageable. The best part, I didn't feel like I was drowning, and I didn't feel like I was losing control of my life. I breastfed all my children. Unlike most moms, I did not enjoy breastfeeding. I dread nursing times, and it often feels like a chore rather. I think postpartum depression is a big contributor to why I felt that way. I chose to breastfeed because I knew the benefits of mom's milk, but honestly, I don't think it helped me recover any faster. However, as much as I was having a hard time enjoying nursing, my supply was not impacted by the postpartum depression that I was going through. I was able to nurse all my children to at least 6 months, and the longest was 12 months.
Hello, everybody. My name is Jasmine Funmaker. My Wangchuk name is Hashoni Winga. I am Bear Clan originally from Black River Falls, Wisconsin. I currently reside in St. Paul, Minnesota. I am currently a newly Indigenous breastfeeding counselor, and I have taken the Postpartum Healing Lodge, and I am also a certified doula through COPE. I am a peer mom with Nitamsing Kimashkikinan. And I'm here to let everybody know my experience with postpartum depression and really get a good look into what causes it and some ways to prevent it. So I had been talked into a medically induced birth. This is my first baby, and I was being told by medical professionals that my baby was too big for me because I was in labor for 3 days. I know, and then it ended up in a emergency C-section because baby was his heart rate was going down, his cord was wrapped around his belly and around his neck. So I was rushed into an emergency C-section. When I finally did get to hold my baby, I don't remember crying or anything. I just had like a sense of relief that he was finally here.
Sorry, everybody, I'm just checking. Does everybody have no audio on this video?
I can hear.
Okay,
I can hear it.
okay, thank you very much. I'll resume. And some of the audio is a little soft on these videos, so you may need to increase your volume. I'll just continue with Jasmine then. Thank you.
And then we started breastfeeding right away. That kind of took a little while for my milk to come in. And hi, son. I'm recording a video. Do you want to say hi? Here he is, everybody. And this is GDP. He's now 2 years old. I'm just telling them our story, son. Yeah, we couldn't sleep together, so that was another thing that was really taking a toll on me. And I just couldn't wait to get home. And when we did get home, I was like, oh yes, I get to sleep with my baby, and it'll be so much more easier than in the hospital, which was not true exactly. Like I said, Dad had to go back to work, so he was working from 10 a.m. until about 10 at night because I was on unpaid medical leave or maternity leave for 3 months. Yes, go see. Oh, go see. So that, so being home in the fall alone with the baby, with the newborn baby, with this big old incision. And I remember this one time calling him because I was hungry. I was at the stove, slouched over, holding my baby. He was starving. I hadn't ate for a while, probably. All these situations, these little situations I know like built up and started taking their tolls on me, and I didn't realize it until it was the winter time, because during this time I also had like I said, I had a nice support team. And I actually have my letter right here from one of my postpartum doulas. And yeah, just reading it right here, everything, it just brings back good memories, because even though I was going through all this, I didn't know. And they were coming and dropping off soup and cooking for me, cleaning for me. My favorite thing was just them holding GDP while I got to take a long hot shower. And yeah, that, huh? Yes. Yes. Get out the house. And I also was a peer mom with Nitamsing Gimishkikinan. And that was also another thing that helped keep my mind busy and get me out the house. But another hard thing with getting out of the house came with the breastfed baby not wanting to be away from mom, and he just screamed, and it was just really hard getting him in the car seat. So it was better for us just to stay home, which caused isolation and isolation led to more depression. And like I said, it was in the fall, winter months, so we were inside and we didn't really get outside as much. And in the Native American community, there's always help around and always a village behind the new mom. Me being 2 hours away from my family, and then on top of that, throw on COVID in the middle of a pandemic, I really didn't get that support from my family. So that was another thing taking a toll on me. You know, I'm like, everybody else got to have mom and Gaga around, and now it's just me and baby. And so that's why I really stress having a community and having a village around to help the mom. So I hope this helps, and thank you for listening to my story. Gigawabaman.
To our next section, I'm very happy to present Joy McAfee. We connected with Postpartum Support Minnesota and asked if they had somebody on their speakers bureau who might be able to present at our workshop, and they identified Joy, and we're so glad to have her with us. Joy, I'm just going to pass it along to you, and then you start sharing your slides, and if you can introduce yourself, I would be most grateful.
That sounds great. I am currently making sure that I optimize and share my sound.
Okay.
Perfect. I'm so excited to begin.
Good. Are you able to override my sharing? Do I need to stop sharing?
I've got it.
Okay,
And
excellent.
yep, I do indeed. Here we go.
So don't see it. There we go. Perfect. Okay, I'll mute myself then and let you take it away.
Perfect. Hello, everyone. My name is Joy McAfee. I am a postpartum doula, and we're going to get to know a little bit more about me momentarily. I've got some information in my slide to kind of tell you who I am. So I'm a wife, I'm a mother, I'm a postpartum depression survivor, I'm a postpartum doula. As I said before, and as it was said before, I'm a member of Postpartum Support Minnesota. I have a passion for cooking and birth work, and I'm excited to share with you my story. So the details of my particular experience as it relates to postpartum depression can actually be found on the Postpartum PPSM podcast on Spotify. That episode recently launched I would say last month. So you can find that if you want to dig a little bit deeper in my story. Our agenda for today, we'll be discussing my lactation journey, as I said before. We'll have our first poll question. We'll discuss the intersectionality of mental health and lactation in the Black community. We'll talk about the intersectionality of the Black community and formula companies' aggressive marketing. We'll have our second poll question. We'll talk about how to reduce breastfeeding disparities in our community. And we even might have time for our third poll question as well. I'll share with you some resources within our community, within the Black community specifically, of specifically lactation support consultants and IBC LCs as well. And we'll have time for Q&A as well. So starting with story time. So my husband and my husband's name is Brandon McAfee. He is a diversity, equity, and inclusion trainer and consultant for Hennepin County. His line of business specifically is public safety. And when he and I first met, it was fireworks, but 6 years prior to us meeting, I actually went through a fire. I was a camp counselor at a camp up north, and my roommate lit a gel candle, and that because the electricity had went out and she needed to find her clothing to get dressed for the day, that candle blew onto my bed and lit my sleeping bag on fire. And luckily I survived, but the outcome of that traumatic experience was post-traumatic stress disorder and severe anxiety. I received mental and mental support, mental health support, and physical support through Regions Hospital. Once my time with Regions Hospital had ended, I was not prepared, nor did I pursue emotionally and mentally. I was not in a space to pursue additional mental health services. At the time, I was only 19 as well. And so once I left the hospital, once I left the hospital, the challenges of navigating PTSD and anxiety it was intense. I did not know, at 6 years later, meeting my husband and getting married and finding ourselves months later pregnant with our first child, our son, I did not know that I would be high risk for having postpartum depression. And so having postpartum depression and breastfeeding at the same time was very challenging. So we spent a lot of time inside. We did not actually leave because of all that I was experiencing. We did not actually leave the house until I was 3 months, until my son was 3 months. So 3 months postpartum and my son was 3 months old. We decided to venture to my husband's father's house and to visit with my mother-in-law and my stepmother-in-law and my father-in-law. My father-in-law is a minister and he's from Michigan. My mother-in-law, she's specifically from Mississippi. And so I tell you all that because it will relate to generational trauma and their thoughts on breastfeeding. So our son was hungry and we were at their home to have dinner. And when he was getting fussy and I was ready to breastfeed, I told my husband in the car prior to getting into their home that we had a receiving blanket, which was very small, would not cover over me totally, but I would utilize that for feeding our son. So he said, "Oh, well, I don't like that, but I guess we can make it work. I'll just stand in front of you." And I said, "No, it's fine. It's okay. We're around our family." And he said, "Well, I don't really like that, but he's got to eat, so it's fine." So we went upstairs into their home, and like I said, when time had passed and he was ready to eat, I had been prepared to execute the plan. My husband had asked his stepmother if we could go into their bedroom, if I could go into the bedroom to feed, and she said, "Why do you need to do that? You don't need to breastfeed. You don't have a bottle for the baby." And we said, no, this is how we feed baby. And she had said, well, why don't you just go out and get a bottle? And his father echoed the same. Go out and get a bottle, get the baby some formula. Do you need the money to get the formula? Do you need the money to get the bottle? Just go get the bottle. And we said, no, can we use the room? This is how we feed our son. And all the while my child is screaming because his need is not being met. And my anxiety is raging because there's a lot going on as I'm trying to prepare to feed my child. And I'm not getting the type of support that I had anticipated or that we see in all of the marketing as it surrounds as breastfeeding, as it relates to breastfeeding. So there was a lot happening. What ended up happening is my stepbrother-in-law and his best friend came in during this conversation and added their information as well. So my elders and the other males in my community are saying, no, you don't want to show your husband's goods. You don't want to do that. That's nasty. We don't need to do that anymore. Just go and get the formula. That's what it's there for. We can make this so easy. We don't have to do all of this. And in the midst of all that conversation, I slipped into the bathroom and just nursed my son on the toilet, crying the entire time and shaking because my anxiety was raging. My stomach was in knots. I couldn't even eat that night. And so that was my experience. From that point forward, every time that I went to breastfeed him, those conversations, that experience came up. I only lasted another month, honestly, maybe even less than that, due to the postpartum depression. My recollection of how long exactly may be a little off, but I remember not breastfeeding for very long after that. And my son developed GERD and acid reflux from the introduction of formula. We tried so many. And even to this day, at 11 years old, my son still struggles with heartburn and nodules on his vocal cords. due to him utilizing formula. What would my time look like had I had the support of my community to breastfeed? If I had had postpartum support, lactation support, or coaching, it could have looked differently. There's no telling. But let's march forward with our first poll question. Okay, so our first poll question. I've shared with you my experience as it relates to breastfeeding publicly, kind of publicly. I mean, I was in my family member's home, but kind of publicly. And so what is your experience? I'd love to poll the audience in here. Have you breastfed in public before? How would you describe, which words would you describe? Everyone's experiences can be so different or so similar. I would just love to see what our poll evaluation says. We've got 14% that have never breastfed in public, 25% that feel that it was pleasant, confident, straightforward, and good, 50% that said it was challenging, awkward, achievable, satisfactory, and 11 that said that it was terrifying, that they felt stressed, that it was vexing, or that it was poor. Got it. So it sounds, from the sound of things, it sounds like maybe my particular experience isn't necessarily the experience that many had, but the 11% that did experience my particular type of terrifying as it relates to breastfeeding, you get me. National breastfeeding statistics. So in the midst of multi-generational trauma and mental health statistics, how nationally, how is the Black community, the white community, the Hispanic community, how are our numbers adding up? So for 2020, as you can see, 75.5% of Black American parents initiated breastfeeding. 85% of Hispanic American parents initiated breastfeeding, and 85.3% of white American parents initiated breastfeeding. Let's take a look at how Minnesota stacks up. What are the stats? So in Minnesota, 2020, 79.1, that should really say 79.13 of Black American parents initiated breastfeeding, 89.3 of Hispanic parents initiated breastfeeding, and 92.1% of white parents initiated breastfeeding. Let's do a deeper dive. Why do we think that might be? Well, statistically, when we're looking at the seeds of racism, systematic racism, implicit bias, police brutality, discrimination from care and treatment of providers, the tree of multi-generational trauma can grow. And the branches of that tree are post-traumatic slave syndrome, racialized trauma, and adverse childhood experiences. So how does adverse childhood experiences, racialized trauma, post-traumatic slave syndrome, specifically the tree of multi-generational trauma, how does it relate to breastfeeding and the Black community? Let's do a bit of a deeper dive. So we know that trauma shapes the brain. We know that it inhibits the fight or flight response in the body. We know that it increases cortisone levels, which can break down the immune system. And that in and of itself is a way that breast milk is impacted. We know that trauma will shorten the length of time in which breastfeeding takes place, as we saw in my experience as well. We also know that there are multiple narratives surrounding breastfeeding and that stem from multi-generational trauma. There's an incredible certified nurse midwife. Her name is Stephanie Devane Johnson. She's of Greensboro, North Carolina. She conducted a focus group she pulled 18-year-old women all the way up to 89-year-old women in Greensboro, North Carolina. Her research, her findings created a story, a narrative as it relates to the Black community and breastfeeding. As you can see, their narratives pointed towards echoes of slave women being forced to give up their milk and utilize dirty water and cow's milk to feed their infants, which caused death in infants during slavery. And this was done so that they could save their breast milk for breastfeeding their white slave owners' children. That image of oppression is still present within the Black community as it relates to breastfeeding. Black women didn't talk or don't talk to their sisters, their daughters, their granddaughters about how to feed their babies. So the conversation was not happening. The instruction was not being passed down. Also, the over-sexualization of Black women in society, breasts being seen as sexual, not functional, i.e. my brother-in-law, my step-brother-in-law and his best friend saying, you don't want to show your husband's goods when my breasts were being used for what they were created for, to feed my child. So they in this study, the younger generation was said to really speak on the over-sexualization of Black women in society as it relates to their choice in breastfeeding or not breastfeeding. Some women said breastfeeding was a white thing. This was the older folks, the 89 to 50, 60-year-olds were saying breastfeeding is a white thing, and that the bottle was just something that was assumed within that particular focus group. That was something that was shared. So let's talk about where some of those perspectives come from. I have this incredible video that comes from Dr. Joy DeGroy. She is wonderful at providing research and information, and really coining the term, creating the syndrome that is post-traumatic slave syndrome. It's a little bit more than just a mental injury. It trickles down into so much of socialization. Let's watch the video and learn a little bit more about post-traumatic slave syndrome, and really try to dig a little bit deeper as you're listening, and listen to how make the correlation, make the tie between how these perspectives of the oppression image, these perspectives of over-sexualization, these perspectives of it being cultural, breastfeeding being cultural and being something that's mainly something that white folks do, as they said, quote, as they quoted. Really watch and see where that's coming from in this video.
Post-traumatic slave syndrome is an explanatory theory that really looks at multi-generational trauma. One of the things that's difficult for people is their first response is, oh my God, that happened so long ago. We're talking about people being captured, shipped, sold, beaten, raped, experimented on, and then you have to ask the question, did the trauma continue? Yes, so 300 years of trauma, no help, freed. No help, more trauma. If it's a sustained trauma, then the impact of that is also sustained. When we look at multi-generational trauma, we're looking at people who are maybe victims of natural disasters and their families and their children, and generations of folks who have experienced war. And we know that there are residual mental, emotional, traumatic impact. And what I did was I started to look at the African American experience, starting with slavery, as a real clear, long enduring trauma. I started to see that there were clear connections between that survival behavior and contemporary living in African American experience. I started to see common behaviors that I took for granted as, well, cultural. There's adaptive behaviors. survival behaviors. Well, what are they? Let's just say 2019, you have a black mother and a white mother. The sons go to school together. They find themselves at a meeting. The black mother leans over to the white mother and says, I just wanted to mention to you that I noticed that your son is really doing quite well. And the white mother's response is, oh, thank you. She begins to go on and on about he won the science fair, his uncle's an astronaut. She's just oozing. She realizes the black mother's son is actually excelling her son. And she says, well, wait a minute. Your son's the one that's really coming along. And the black mother responds, oh my God, he's a handful, but oh, he just works my nerves. Now, when I'm working with African American people, it doesn't matter what the audience is. It doesn't matter what class. If I were to ask, is she very proud while she's saying those denigrating things? And everybody laughs and goes, of course, there's a secret. Because everybody black knows that even though the black mother is going, oh my God, she's really proud. So now let's roll that scene back 300 years. And let's say this black mother is working in the fields and a white slave owner comes through and says, wow, that boy is really coming along. What is she gonna say? No, he's not. He's stupid. He's shiftless. He can't work because I don't want you to sell him. So I denigrate them to protect them. That is called appropriate adaptation when living in a hostile environment. The little white boy, say Timmy, he feels really comfortable and happy about what his mom just said about him. And Trey looks at his mom and wonders, why can't you be proud of me? Because he doesn't understand the secret yet. And by the time he learns the secret, he will have already been injured by it. Post-traumatic slave syndrome. PTSD is a disorder that occurs as a result of a single trauma. You don't even have to be there to actually get a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder. You could just hear about something horrific happening to someone you love. So you have people who have experienced it firsthand, people who have witnessed it in their environment, right? People who are continuing to be oppressed. That exacerbates any possibility of healing. So it's not post-traumatic stress disorder, because then it becomes part of what we call your socialization process. So you begin to normalize a way of living and being, everything from what we eat to what we believe it means to be a friend. All of these things are colored by history. And if you don't understand it, you're going to fold in things that you've just assumed are normal. But post-traumatic stress disorder, exaggerated startle response, outbursts of anger, feeling of foreshortened future. There was a point where there were African American children in different urban settings that didn't expect to live to be adults because they saw so much death, that they started planning their funerals like at 13, 12, as young as 10. When you start looking at the simple biology, you start looking at the impact of stress on health. And while we look at general stress, we know finances, you have illnesses, all these different things. How about being black? How does factoring in being black in America impact your stress level and therefore your body's ability to operate its own immune system? Because we know it compromises the immune system. Once you understand it, then you can deal with it. Because you see, it's habitual. You're socialized. It becomes part of your being. So one of the ways you begin to address that multi-generational trauma is to work with the people it directly impacts, to hear from them. And when you give the people the information, they can use it. I think the first order of business is beginning to have a conversation. And the other is to educate the larger society. You have to stop the assault. So this is not purely a clinical thing. This requires social justice and change. That's where part of the healing is. It's not in a clinical setting or in a pill. It's in fairness and justice and safety and equity. We got to work with some of those clinical things, some of those issues of panic and anxiety. And we also have to deal with the fact that you have a system that is set up to oppress you and to continue to injure you. Both those things have to be dealt with. And they cannot singularly by themselves affect a change. They have to be done collectively.
That is intense. And I fully understand that was intense. When I first saw this video, I was able to make the direct correlation to my experience with breastfeeding that day at that incident, and that incident specifically as it related to breastfeeding at my in-laws' house. My in-laws were degrading my choice to breastfeed my child to protect me. Because if I'm showing my breast in public, what could happen? Well, maybe I could be raped. Maybe I could be someone trying to solicit me. And so the idea of my breast being sexual over functional, what came from multi-generational trauma. It came from their response to degrade me in order to protect me. And so that there's a lot of information there. And that's not just for me. The information that came from the focus group in North Carolina also says some women who had, so this is a direct quote from that particular research. Some women who had breastfed said it was a topic that couldn't be addressed in their families. If they did breastfeed, they didn't breastfeed at, say, their aunt's house. They would tell them, you can't do that in my house. Breastfeeding is nasty. Devaney Johnson says this as her research. You don't talk about boobies because breasts are sometimes seen as sexual and not functional. Again, hearkening back to my experience as well. All right, that's just one, those are just one impact to the Black community as it relates to breastfeeding. Another would be aggressive marketing strategies directed towards the Black community and Black families in order to increase marketing, increase sales of formula. So we've got families, Black families, that are experiencing trauma, that are holding on to the heavy, that are navigating their days with ACEs, that are navigating their days and nights and their work experiences with post-traumatic slave syndrome, that are navigating their experiences with systematic racism and police brutality, multi-generational trauma, right? And so they are drawing the correlation. They're telling themselves, their family members, their loved ones, that breastfeeding is outdated to protect them. They're telling them that breastfeeding is nasty. They're telling them that breastfeeding is not something that the Black community does, or they're just not having the conversation at all. And so here comes, in the 1940s and 1950s, Pet Milk, Carnation, and Borden with their artificial human milk that they're looking to sell. Their numbers are not great. So they start looking at what items, what products, who is buying up particular baby products. And what did they find? They found that so many communities are in need of particular products, but the Black community was really starting to make an impact in sales. And so they started to target the Black community specifically. How did they do so? They did so in the 1940s and 1950s with the birth of the false quads. Before we move on to the history of the false quads, or the false sisters, let's move into our second poll question. So poll question number 2 has to do with breastfeeding, mixed feeding, and or formula feeding. Before we dive deeper into breastfeeding and the history of aggressive marketing, let's really get an idea of what's happening in Minnesota, the clients and the patients that you're currently providing care to or seeing or speaking with, or the numbers that you've seen. Are you seeing that the Black clients or patients are breastfeeding, or that they're formula feeding, or that they're mixed feeding? Or is this question not applicable? I'll be so interested to see the outcomes of this particular questionnaire. So we've got a lot of mixed feeding happening, breastfeeding and formula feeding together. That's at 53%, 9% formula feeding and 11% breastfeeding. 27% said that the questions isn't applicable. So now that we've got that understanding, that we've polled our audience, let's move into aggressive marketing and how it impacts the Black community. Starting with this particular history. So this is to give you an idea of the past This is a quick snapshot into their story, and we'll do a deeper dive afterwards. So with this particular slide, with this particular information, there's still some information that happens to be missing. For instance, Pete was a sharecropper, and their mother, Annie, she happened to be considered at the time at the time they used the words deaf and mute. Now we use the words hearing impaired and nonverbal. And so during the time when Pet Milk was soliciting the false quads, the use of the false quads images, they also required that Pet Milk only be given to the false quads, not breast milk. They did not ask, Pet Milk did not ask Annie or Pete, their parents. Instead, they asked their doctor. And they really made the case that this was required, that Pet Milk was required because Annie could not communicate effectively to be taught how to care for her quads. They also made the case that Annie, being the mother of 6 children prior to the false quads, was unable to care for the children, and that financially they were not in a place where they could afford to care for their children. So what Pet Milk did is they offered the opportunity to pay the family $350 a month and give them some farmland, which happened to be barren, not just difficult as it says in the slide. The farmland was actually barren. It could not grow anything. And also they utilized the girls' images. They had permission to utilize the girls' images from the time that they were, that the contract was negotiated with their doctor, all the way up until the girls were adults. Sadly, from when the girls turned around 16, their numbers began to drop. The marketing numbers, the amount of Pet Milk formula that they were selling began to drop a little bit. And so they stopped providing the $350. They no longer paid for a nurse as well to provide support to the family. And at that point, they also just kind of stopped providing any type of benefit to the family whatsoever. However, they were still getting the financial benefits of utilizing the images of the false sisters, which is one of many ways that they were exploited. So I also need to share as well that Borden and Carnation also asked the Quad Sisters doctor for permission to utilize the Quad Sisters images and the the Fultz family's information and the Fultz family in general for marketing, and the doctor said no, but he did agree to doing so with pet milk. So the slide at the end also says that 3 of the sisters passed away with breast cancer. As of 2018, Mary Catherine, at 72 years old, she also passed away of breast cancer as well. Would their ability to thrive past 72 years old and past 54 years old and past 43 years old be an option had they been given the opportunity to breastfeed rather than to be given pet milk? We don't know. We don't know, but we do know that the aggressive marketing strategies that were utilized, it was so prevalent that they were sending out autographed photos of the Fultz sisters to anyone that was purchasing more than 3 cans of their pet milk formula. So it was a big deal. It was a big deal. In the 40s and 50s, my mother, she was born in 53. My stepmother-in-law, she was born in 54. And so this was happening during their time, seeing women that looked like them, that were being told or called in their advertising as attractive, and being given opportunities like scholarships from pet milk to go to college, as you saw on the slide, to being given these opportunities as well to play the string quartet in public places that we weren't allowed to be in the 50s. It really opened their eyes and made them feel that formula is the wave of the future to get Black children the future that they were not given, that the elders, the older generation, did not see or did not think was attainable for themselves. And so through that aggressive marketing, we have our elders that see that and are impacted by that and believe that it's the wave of the future and what we should be doing instead of breastfeeding. That is where some of that comes from. Let's move forward. No, we don't want to do that. With our third question. For our third poll question, are you currently referring clients or patients to Black IBCLCs or lactation support specialists? Let's take a look and see what the results of that question might be. 33% yes, 67% no. So I've given a look into the past and the present as it relates to breastfeeding in the Black community while navigating multi-generational trauma. So let's start taking a look into the future. How can we do as Dr. Joy DeGrory says and stop the assault? How can we reduce these disparities, specifically in the Black community? How can we be a part of creating more equitable outcomes in the Black community surrounding breastfeeding? Well, let's take a look at some disparity reducing tactics. Culturally specific evidence-based care and peer lactation support. There is statistics that back up the importance of culturally specific evidence-based care and how it can turn the tide with what we're seeing as it relates to discrimination from care and treatment providers, as it relates to navigating systematic racism, specifically within birth and postpartum journeys. And so really having culturally specific evidence-based peer lactation support, postpartum support, culturally specific maternal and postpartum mental health resources and support, What would it look like for me when I was struggling in that time, at that 3-4 month period? What would it look like for me to have somebody come alongside me and tell me, remind me that my breasts are adequate for feeding, and that here's the tools that you need to do so in public in a way that makes me feel safe and in a way that allows me to continue to breastfeed my child? What would that look like for him? What would that have looked like for me? What would that look like for others that find themselves navigating these narratives, these challenges? I had no idea. When I had first seen that there is a collar that can go around your neck that creates a cape type or a tent type effect in which you can breastfeed your child, had I had that, would that whole situation occurred? Maybe not. Had I had been given that information and or probably also at the time the resources financially to and where to find it, would that have been the experience, my experience? Maybe not, maybe. What would it look like to provide information to Black families about the breastfeeding benefits? It's pasted everywhere, as I had shared in my experience 11 years ago as well. It was pasted everywhere, the benefits of breastfeeding, which was why I chose to breastfeed. And also I figured that there would be more ease than having to get up in the middle of the night and clean a bottle and things like that. But I really found that to not have the information and for my community not to have that particular information, not me, but for my community not to have that information, it was problematic. It created this experience, and maybe so much more caused that as well. The empathy of having empathy for the challenges that Black families face while trying to breastfeed. Dr. Joy also stated listening to a community and seeing what is their narrative, what is their experience, what is the need in order to be successful in breastfeeding long term. Affirming any length of time in which Black families worked at breastfeeding. I working with clients postpartum, I know a lot of clients are hoping to breastfeed long term, are really wanting the tools and the tactics in order to breastfeed long term. For me specifically, and for other friends, mothers, community members that were pregnant or nursing around the same time that I was, I really felt like, oh, this is inadequate. This 3-4 months, that wasn't the goal. My child isn't even ready to start on stop being introduced with solids or anything. And yet here I am trying to figure out formula feeding. So what would it look like in order if I were to be affirmed during that time with breastfeeding and the length of time that I did breastfeed? Gaining understanding of the tools and resources needed for success. Like I said, that CAPE would have been amazing. It would have been amazing to have had access or know about and have the resources to be able to have the CAPE. And also to be able to afford a breast pump. Sometimes that can be problematic, particularly in the midst of COVID, are not ideal. Families are feeling like that's not ideal. That's not what they're wishing to have access to in order to feed their baby. There may be concerns around the tools or resources that are currently available in the community. The best way to find out the answers to those questions is to ask Black families what they need to succeed at breastfeeding. That's really the best that we can work towards at this time as it relates to reducing the disparities within the Black community with breastfeeding. So how do we get access to culturally specific, evidence-based peer support? Well, here's a few. This is just a start of a list. Diva Moms, they create a support group. They're located in St. Paul. They have a support group that they run for mothers that are lactating that would like to have some support, some peer support, some questions answered, some resources as well, some resources to get their hands on things that are needed. Dr. Levon Moore, She's a IBCLC and a midwife. She runs, is the owner and operator of Chosen Vessels Midwifery Services. She also runs the Chocolate Milk Club, which is a place where Black families can meet and connect for lactation services. Sierra Leone, she is the owner and operator of Milestone Creations. She's also an incredible lactation support and breastfeeding support specialist as well. So that's just a start. And what happens, because we do know that there is such a shortage as it relates to Black IBCLCs, as it relates to Black lactation specialists, what do we do? Well, this would be a great place to start, to reach out to one of these incredible lactation support specialists within St. Paul, Minneapolis, and ask if they have access to others, if they know of others, in order to gain the type of support that families are needing as well. All right, it is our question and answers time. I would like to open up, we've got plenty of time. I'd like to open up the floor for any questions that you may have surrounding the information that was shared today.
Yeah, I just hi Joey, this is LaSherry. We were on the panel together a couple weeks ago. I want to say hi. Honored to be with you again. And yeah, you know, I'm a Black lactation consultant.
Okay.
And you know, I definitely work with you know, a lot of Black moms who, you know, really do want to breastfeed. And you know, some of the challenges I've seen with it is stress, because I work with a lot of moms, Black moms too, who are in you know, going through a lot of stressful financial situations. And sometimes when like the stress of paying the bills and things like that get out of hand, you know, they feel like, you know, my milk supply, I feel like my milk supply is dropping, you know, because I'm so stressed. And, you know, they have that concern regarding that, and regarding, you know, the many other stressors. And they feel like, you know, since I'm so stressed and I feel like my milk supply is dropping, now I'm not pumping as much, or now I'm not feeding the baby as much. So, you know, things like that. And I even had one client of mine too, who before she even had her baby, she started getting formula mailed to her house. She was like, why am I getting this formula mailed to my house? Like, what is going on? Like, you know, so yeah, I just want to share that aspect of it too. The stress is sometimes the social determinants of health can get in the way as well.
Absolutely. There are several economic impacts regarding trauma. As I had stated before, the body, we know that trauma impacts the body and shapes the mind as well. And that there are impacts to our breast milk, the ability to produce, and even the quality of the breast milk. Do we have as many is there enough immune system blocks found within our breast milk if we are stressed, if we're not able to get back to work because our body is still healing, or if we are going back to work and while our body is still healing? There's a lot of economic impacts as it relates to multi-generational trauma, for sure. And aggressive marketing, absolutely. That's still happening, where formula is being mailed to families without even being requested. You're absolutely right. Or where you're going to the doctor for your however many month checkup, and you're being given formula, or even at some hospitals where you're being given formula before you walk out the door, without even being asked what your intentions are, if you would like to breastfeed, or if you would like to formula feed, or here's what to do if you find yourself, here's some resources if you find yourself struggling with breastfeeding. Absolutely, those are absolute impacts to breastfeeding in the Black community. Thank you very, very much for sharing that. Next question.
So this is Linda. There are a couple of questions in the chat section, and thank you so much, Joy. It's just,
yes, if you could share those, Linda, that'd be great.
Yeah, it's such a wonderful, really appreciate your being here. So one is, one question is there more than one Black IBCLC in Minnesota? And our understanding is there is. We don't have a listing or a registry of IBCLCs in Minnesota, BIPOC or otherwise. I know that one person is trying to get a chapter of ILCA which is the International Lactation Consultant Association. States have chapters, trying to get a chapter going in Minnesota, which would be a lovely way to have a registry or a listing of IBCLCs. But there are more than just Dr. Levon, who is, an absolute treasure. But the question is, as a white nurse and lactation counselor, what are some things that you would recommend that that person keeps in mind while working with Black moms and Black families?
Absolutely. As stated before in the disparities slide, really just having empathy and affirmation, even going as far to create a toolbox for yourself that can be shared with your clients, such as helping them create their own affirmations or creating affirmations for them that affirms their ability to breastfeed at any length of time. Also sharing the benefits, continuing to share the benefits of breastfeeding, and moving forward with the having empathy, asking questions with what are the needs, what are the barriers that they may be experiencing to getting the tools that they need to be successful. And then also sharing touching base with culturally specific lactation support specialists and or IBCLCs to ask what it is that they are seeing as helpful in serving their peers that are their culturally specific peers as well.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And just
we have
folks are looking for some resources in the chat section too.
Great, that's fantastic. This is teamwork making the dreams works.
Mm-hmm. One other question from LaSherion. She's had clients say that men in her family did not like her breastfeeding her son past 6 months because he was too old, using quotes, too old. The men also had concerns that breastfeeding for too long would make the baby, the son, too feminine.
Okay. Yes, absolutely. I mean, that's proof positive that multi-generational trauma and over-sexualization go hand in hand as it relates to our ability to breastfeed. I've even heard Black families say that they are worried about breastfeeding as it relates to nipple stimulation and being sexually aroused by breastfeeding. Folks saying that they don't want breastfeeding to occur with their spouse, with their friend, with their family member, with another community member, because that is a concern. And again, that's that over-sexualization piece that we were talking about as it relates to multi-generational trauma. What are some other questions or comments?
Hello?
Question. Go ahead, Carol or Amara.
Oh, I just wanted to say, my name is Amira. I live in Duluth, Minnesota. I'm African American and I'm a breastfeeding peer counselor. And I noticed in the chat, a lot of people are saying they don't have any Black breastfeeding peer counselors. And I was just gonna say, how I got hired is when I went to WIC. When I got pregnant, I went to WIC for my checkups. And then when my daughter was like, I think 12 months, they actually called me and they asked me if I was still breastfeeding. And I said, yeah. And then they asked me, did I want to take a position actually to be a breastfeeding peer counselor. And they trained me and took a lot of seminars and whatnot. So that could possibly be a way that people in other areas can find Black peer counselors, breastfeeding peer counselors.
Absolutely. I completely agree with that. Also certifying bodies, birth work certifying bodies such as CAPPA, which is Childbirth and Postpartum Professionals Association, or DONA. And there are so many others as well. DONA International as well. Those are a great place to go in, and they have directory and you can put in a specifics of what you're looking for. Are you looking for an IBCLC? Are you looking for a lactation specialist? Are you looking for a postpartum doula? Are you looking for a birth doula? You can put in that information. And in some cases, you can even put in if there's a culturally specific need that you're looking for. And even if there's a radius that you're looking for, and then they'll let you know what's available, what they have in their database. There are several different national databases as well that you can put in information. Bornbir, BORNBIR, is another that is collecting data of local and national birth workers and lactation support specialists, going into those and really putting in what it is that you're looking for in order to find resources is really great. There are so many that are coming through the chat that really being able to solve this particular problem in order to reduce our disparities, it's happening. We're working on it. Also, I'm excited to announce that starting in November, I will begin training on becoming a certified IBCLC. So along with being a postpartum doula, which will be my main focus for the rest of my life, postpartum doula, I will also become an IBCLC as well. It is my full intention to support families of color, and all families really that are looking to receive support. My focus will definitely be, especially since the coursework that I'll be working on will be culturally specific breastfeeding training. And so my plan is to be a support person, be another resource as it relates to culturally specific peer lactation support as well.
Joy, this is Carol. There was another question that was put in the chat earlier. And first of all, this is amazing. You're sharing your transparency. But the question earlier, after watching the video on post-traumatic slave syndrome, so the boy whose mother is not acknowledging his talents because of PTSS, is there therapy for this and the children to understand this? The person put, I understand it takes generations, of course, to make changes. Thank you.
Yes, what a wonderful question. Thank you. So at this time, that post-traumatic slave syndrome is labeled as a mental injury. It's not specifically diagnosed. It's under the umbrella of PTSD, as Dr. Joy stated. And so, yes, there is therapy as well, but it requires those that have been trained specifically in multi-generational trauma as it relates to the Black experience. And so there we have, again, the need for culturally specific care within mental health as well. I'm sure that there are several different areas in which we can find culturally specific, mental health resources as well. If you know of culturally specific mental health resources, please feel free to drop them in the chat.
So Joy, this is Linda. I want to say a heartfelt thank you so much for being here. It was such a joy to meet you, Joy. And just for us, by us reaching out to Postpartum Support Minnesota, we're so lucky to meet you. I'll finish your presentation and then we'll move on to the concluding activity.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I appreciate the invitation and the opportunity to share my experience, as well as what I know about multi-generational trauma and how it impacts the ability to breastfeed. Let's just take 2 minutes, just to reflect. There was a lot of information that was shared. Which disparity reducing tactic are you most likely to use with breastfeeding, Black breastfeeding families specifically? Culturally specific evidence-based lactation support, or asking Black families what they need to succeed at breastfeeding. One requires us to reach outside of ourselves and find support within the community that is culturally specific. The other is to do our own work within ourselves in order to listen, openly listen, and then to ask what is needed in order for Black families to succeed at breastfeeding. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share my knowledge and again, share my experience. If you have any further questions, comments, or concerns, Linda can give you my information, and please feel free to email me.
Thank you. So just as a reminder, we will be sending out the recording of this 3-hour session. We're not quite done. We just have about 10 minutes to go. We'll send the recording out when that's been processed. We'll send the PDFs of the slides from both Joy and Maria, and we will send out the contact information for both Maria and for Joy, because I know that a lot of people want to reach out personally to you. And please look in the chat section. There's a link to the evaluation. And I also want to just move to our final activity. I am putting a link in the chat section. It starts with HTTPS Padlet. So Padlet is a sort of a virtual sticky wall. And I just wanted to spend a little bit of time with all of you on this virtual sticky wall, just sharing what you learned today and what you're going to be taking forward into your work. So I will just quickly reshare that Padlet link because somebody just joined. And the way to use this, you'll see my screen. This is the screen that I'm sharing, but you'll need to go onto a second screen to share. There's a little button in the bottom right. You can do this on your phone, and you can click and you can write something. So I'm going to, like, for example, I'm going to learn more about post-traumatic slave syndrome. I can add a photo if I want. You can click on the ... You can add a little photo. I'm going to do one about, I'm looking for a photo that is about learning. So I'm going to, I'll just put this here about learning. So this is how you add your note to the sticky wall. What's your next step? How are you going to move forward? One person says that they've been missing out on how to work with Black families. And we'll just work, and this is sort of a quiet activity. So if you don't feel comfortable adding something to the Padlet, please observe, or maybe you can unmute and comment. So one person wants to learn more about Hmong history. One person says they are ready and they have more empathy. It seems that the information about the post-traumatic slave syndrome is really resonating with a lot of people. So we'll just do this for a couple more minutes. Just write down, add something to this virtual sticky wall. I am able to archive this sticky wall, and I'll send it out to you with the recording and the PDF slides. So you will have a copy of this board as well. One person says they'd like to have a list of the BIPOC breastfeeding support options for Minnesota to be able to share culturally based support options. You may know that the Minnesota Breastfeeding Coalition has a new website, and while it's not the only listing, it's not the only resource, we are trying to make sure that it is complete with resources that are developed by and for different communities. So if you know of resources developed by and for very particular communities, and it could be African American community, LGBTQI community, whichever very specific community has developed resources for their families, we'd love to be able to lift that up and highlight it and promote it through the Minnesota Breastfeeding Coalition. There are other ways to promote that information, I know. We're just one. Give us about 30 more seconds. Any more notes that you want to put up here? Feel free to spend some time reading these. One person wants to find a way to listen first and listen thoroughly. Okay. So I just want to conclude with my gratitude to the whole planning team, my gratitude to Minnesota Breastfeeding Coalition, my gratitude to Maria Moa and Joy McAfee and Postpartum Support Minnesota, and my gratitude to all of you, because I think this is how we build community, and this is how we come together for a common mission, just to make sure that every family in Minnesota has access to all the resources and information they need to reach their breast and chest feeding goals and to live a really healthy, fulfilling life. So you'll be receiving all of the follow-up information when that's been processed. And I want to invite all of you to have an amazing weekend. If you don't access the evaluation in the chat section, you will receive the link when we send out that follow-up email. So just want to say one final thank you.